Divas, welcome back. Oh, goody. We've got a special guest for you today. U.S. Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She and I go in the Wayback Machine. We talk about what she calls the big ugly bill, the family feud in the Republican Party. We talk a little bit about the Democrats. They've got their own issues as well, but also she gives us a lot of insight into the 2026 midterm elections, what she thinks about the congressional races, and so much more. Please join us today, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
The willingness of a president to just do whatever they want and engage in literally autocratic authoritarian rule wasn't contemplated by the founding fathers.
You're listening to Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida. Let's dive in.
Okay, divas, welcome back. Frequent guest of the show, one of my OGs. I don't know, frequent guest. I'm putting you in the frequent guest category because we are huge fans of U.S. Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I know her from back in the day when she served in the state legislature. So welcome back to Deeper Dive.
Thank you. Yeah, we're going like at 30 years now.
Isn't that wild? Because you were an aide. You were an aide before you were.
Well, going back that far, then it's like 34 years.
I'm not sure if I was in the Capitol back then, but we do go in the way back. She's also from the People's Republic of Broward, back where my people hail from. In fact, I've mentioned before, my aunt and her husband live in your district. They're snowbirds, so they're up in New York right now, but they're huge fans of yours.
Blue bulwark.
Right. So you also are a former chairwoman of the National Democratic Party, the Democratic National Committee. We will talk about that in a moment. But let's start with things in D.C. I mean, oh my goodness, it is the Republicans, kind of like Florida on a, writ large, I guess on a larger scale. Republicans control everything now.
Right.
Donald Trump is, a creature of a different ilk that the country never saw before his first term. And now we're seeing a whole different iteration of him in his second term. You haven't had a chance to see this because I was just scrolling on Twitter before you hopped on the Zoom, and Mike Pence wrote an op-ed, and he says the opening to that is an existential identity crisis now grips the American right, which is kind of like he much better articulated than the question I was going to ask you. But what is going on in Washington? Give us your analysis.
Well, I guess I'm not really surprised, having served in Congress with Mike Pence and actually been able to work with him on some things. We vehemently disagreed, and we definitely, did news interviews together as point counterpoint. But Mike Pence understands the responsibility that the United States has had as the most responsible actor in terms of keeping people safe, in terms of prioritizing, promoting peace and democracy, and understanding the importance of soft power that the United States has projected around the world that has been in our national security interests. And you contrast that with what is going on in the MAGA cult world, where they worship Trump. We're seeing Putin levels of corruption from Trump and his family. The scale is like no other. It's brazen and open. And it's more than a culture of corruption, which is what we talked about, back, believe it or not, in the day when George W. Bush was president. But Trump has coded bribery and venality into his presidential DNA. And when it comes to his foreign policy, it is so erratic and
Yeah.
so stick your finger in the wind, and on any given morning, not even day, you have no idea. You know, he has no long-term plan. He doesn't pay attention. I mean, what we just learned is he has a Secretary of Defense in Hegseth that he doesn't even consult on Iran. I mean, he has a national security team that he doesn't even trust. I mean, he isn't. He is not consulting his director of.
Is it a good or a bad thing that he's not consulting some of these folks?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly glad.
I wish you could see the expression on Debbie's face, because like her eyes.
How do you surround? He's surrounded himself with incompetence and people who have absolutely no qualifications for the most sensitive jobs that are whose primary and main purpose is to help the president protect our national security and keep Americans safe. And I mean, the fact that there's an existential crisis perceived by the former vice president who served under Trump in his first term, while they're in charge of everything at a time when they should be able to come together and be able to advance an agenda, really ram through an agenda, regardless of what Democrats think. This shows you the colossal dysfunction and how much that endangers our national security, and how much it really undermines the underpinnings of the United States. We have an economic crisis that he's potentially throwing us into, with uncertainty because of his ridiculous erratic tariff policy. The fact that they've been slashing, cutting jobs, violating the law through impoundment of funds, cutting massive amounts of funding for veterans. I mean,
yeah, the list goes on and on.
It's chaos run amok.
But and yet, I feel like people, just regular people, Republicans, a lot of them are just kind of like, they shrug their shoulders, and it's, this is Trump. They expect him to be a disruptor. I mean, they certainly anticipated a certain amount of chaos, and yet I think the reason why Mike Pence and other Republicans, conservatives, are coming out now is there's a little creating discomfort for people, say in the construction industry with the immigration thing,
agriculture industry and the restaurant industry, and
right. So discomfort among people who were and still are on many levels their allies, and the idea that we're going to start a war or enter a war or participate a war, when a lot of these folks are like, no more forever wars, right? So what's going on in Iran and the Middle East? I mean, how much do you think people are really tracking all that?
I mean, we aren't starting a war. Let's be clear.
I didn't mean start, but I mean enter into. You're right. Words matter. I actually have that written down on my paper. Yes. Entering into or engaging in warfare maybe is a better way of putting it.
I mean, the biggest problem right now is, I'll just respond to what you just said about the Republican Party writ large, and why the cult half of the Republican Party, just shrugs their shoulders and says, well, that's Trump. I think that over the course of most people's lifetimes as Americans, we've had confidence in the endurance of our system of government. We've had confidence because we've had the longest stretch of successful democracy in the world. And that with the ebb and flow and also the ups and downs of the various characteristics of previous presidents, right? Reagan was a controversial president. George W. Bush was a controversial president. Nixon was. I know I'm naming all Republicans, but um, when you have we've had a system of government that people could rely on, but that's because the executive branch and the legislative branch had respect for the judicial system, and there were norms that were followed, even though in law, we never there wasn't, and apparently we're going to have to fix that, because when you have even though in law there wasn't a way to resolve when a president ignores a court order, or when a president ignores the law and impounds funds, holds on, withdraws funding that Congress passed and a president signed into law. The willingness of a president to just do whatever they want and engage in literally autocratic authoritarian rule wasn't contemplated by the founding fathers.
Right.
And haven't had to deal with that.
So we don't have a mechanism to restrain that.
We have mechanisms, but a lot of those have an ability to be blocked by executives, people in authorities in the executive branch. And, the system has been based on trust for 249 years. And so I think we still have the residual effects in America by Americans of, this too shall pass. And this isn't an existential crisis. We're not going to have, everything's going to go back to normal. The rest of the part components of the government are going to take care of the erratic nature of this president. And, there is a very great possibility that isn't going to happen. And so that's the very disturbing thing here. And, part of this is really because Trump is really nearly singularly focused on grift. He has done a breathtaking amount of actions that have been designed to line his own pockets. It's Putin levels of corruption from his whole family. It's a scale like we've never seen before. He has a crypto scam that allows for direct anonymous payoffs. We're talking about after one attendee at his crypto dinner had her son pardoned immediately afterwards.
Yeah.
When she paid $1 million to sit at his table. Look at his Truth Social ownership. The same thing, the foreign hotel deals, the new phone company.
The phone company thing is just
crashing in unheard of levels, billions, maybe tens of billions. You have people who are going to lose, at least 16 million people are going to lose their health insurance as a result of him trying to transfer more wealth to billionaires in this one big ugly bill, where he's cutting people off of Medicaid. They're cutting and making the largest cut to nutrition assistance in history. There are people that are going to go hungry, people who will die because they can't go to the doctor, Dara. It's sick.
I was going to ask you about the bill. You called it the big ugly bill. Of course, the president and his advocates called it the big beautiful bill. Can you just give us what are the sticking points, or what you think is going to, it's undergoing changes. We're recording this on a Friday. The podcast comes out on Sunday. It's there will be changes, and it's undergoing changes, but you mentioned some of the highlights there that are concerning to you. Anything else that you think?
This is not just sticking points. This is legislation written on flypaper. This is a bill that is so, the level of cruelty and pain that this bill is going to cause because of, it is blowing a hole in the deficit, for example, so deep that it will cause sequestration to kick in, meaning there'll be a $500 billion cut to Medicare that, 46 billion of which will kick in next year.
So
if
that's
this bill
Medicare is for people who are older and are really, really sick and have, right?
That's Medicaid. I'm talking about Medicare,
Okay, right.
normal Medicare, normal, the senior healthcare program.
Right. I thought there were some illnesses that were covered under Medicare too. But anyway, yeah.
You can be dual eligible for
Right.
Medicaid and Medicare, but I'm talking about separate
So
and apart.
next year, you're going to have.
$800 billion. This bill has $800 billion in cuts to Medicaid. And then you add another 500 billion onto that of Affordable Care Act changes so
Yeah.
that more people are going to get kicked off of their Affordable Care Act that makes it affordable. And because the bill is so expensive and blows such a large hole in our deficit, the federal law that was passed under the Budget Control Act years ago requires, past a certain point that our deficit reaches, it requires a trigger in Medicare cuts. That's the healthcare program for our seniors.
Right.
Republicans and Democrats always say we're never going to touch, only Republicans don't mean it.
You know, that's so interesting to me because it's perplexing because the deficit is such a big issue for Republicans, right? Like in Florida here, we just got done with a 105-day legislative session and, they're paying down debt and putting money into reserves. And I think they've alluded to it, but they haven't quite really out and out said it, that they are concerned about the economy in the future, in part because of what's happening in Washington.
They don't have as much revenue coming in
Yeah.
that they can count on from because of the cuts that are going to be made and are being made in Washington. And
Right. Well, also because there's no more stimulus money coming in and, whatever. Yeah. Yeah. But the idea that we're going to drive up the deficit when that is an issue that Republicans campaign on and have for many, many years, right?
Meaningless drivel. Republicans don't care about the deficit. If they cared about the deficit, they wouldn't be making it even larger in their big ugly bill. And the Senate, now that they have the bill, this bill passed the House in the middle of the night, dead of dark night, by one vote. I mean, this is a Republican Party that not only, as Mike Pence said, is essentially at war with itself and is causing an existential crisis to their own identity. But this is a Republican Party that is actually making deficits worse, and they are arguing amongst themselves over what is supposedly the president's signature legislation, because there is a faction in the MAGA Republican Party in Congress that doesn't think that the pain is enough and we need deeper cuts. And there are some who generally aren't willing to stand up to the MAGA extremists because they don't want to lose primaries to MAGA opponents, who understand that we shouldn't cut that much, but they're unwilling to stand up to them.
So where does that leave the Democrats? I mean, you have your own family feud that's erupted not too long ago. David Hogg, he's actually, I don't know where he lives now, but he was at Parkland. He's from Parkland. He attended Marjorie Stoneman Douglas during that horrible mass shooting and was a leader in creating the March for Our Lives. And he recently had a very a public, brutal split with leadership in your former, you were the head DNC. So how do you guys?
No.
It's a different. It's a different chair, but it was very public, and something got leaked, a recording, and I don't know. I guess. Do you guys? Are you facing a generational divide within in the National Democratic Party?
Before I
Sure.
answer that, I need to just sort of like set the table of how these things work structurally.
Okay.
So we're in a midterm election cycle. In a midterm election cycle, the DNC and the RNC, frankly, have less of a role in the political and campaign process. I mean, they are, mostly raising funds, and they support state parties around the country, and they provide them with resources and infrastructure. They can help with staffing and personnel. Some
Right.
strategy, different than a presidential election cycle in which you have a very fully involved and engaged DNC.
Sure.
What happens in the midterm is the congressional level political arms, the DCCC,
Hmm.
the NRCC, the DSCC, and the NRSC, the Senate arms,
Right.
political arms. Those are the democratic entities that are focused on, helping their party's members win the majority, and beat the opposition party. So that's where the focus ends up in terms of the resources that come in. Ideally, you want resources to come in to be value added to the national party, and you certainly don't want there to be dysfunction at the national party. And because of the perception of what the national party is, you want, and we focus on being on the same page in terms of communication and messaging,
Sure.
and we coordinate. Um, so just to set the table on that, this election cycle at the DCCC, we are the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. We're singularly focused on making sure that we will win the majority in the House of Representatives in 26. Hakeem Jeffries will
Okay.
be elected Speaker of the House, and we have to win 3 seats.
3 seats. Is Florida in play?
Um, we have seats in Florida that are on the target list for
I
Republicans.
think
So
that's a no.
no, it's not enough because we don't. Florida isn't in play as a state. We have
No, but I
400
mean those congressional seats. Which congressional seats do you think you can flip in Florida?
congressional seats that are on the target list of the DCCC. Maria Elvira
Down
Salazar
in
is one.
Miami. Yeah.
Polina Luna in Tampa, and there are several other seats that are potentially in play. Corey Mills' seat. I mean, obviously he's had some challenges,
Wow.
and so there's a vulnerability there.
Yeah.
I mean, the Republicans are in so much disarray,
Mm-hmm.
and they have become so unpopular on the ground in congressional districts. I mean, when you only win a seat like Mike Walz's seat in the Melbourne,
Mm-hmm.
area, Space Coast area, and in Pensacola by 15 and 16 points as opposed to 30 and 37 points, which Trump won those districts by, as did their incumbents from then. Um, then you know that there's a huge, huge problem with the Republican agenda. I mean, those are military-heavy communities. The massive cutting that the Republicans are doing under Trump.
In all
To
fairness, those are special elections, and
In a special election, in those seats, they are blood red seats. You
yes,
should not lose in 4 months
right.
from November election to when those specials were held. You
Good
should
point.
not lose
Fair
15
point.
points of
Yeah.
margin.
Yeah.
Unless you're doing something wrong, and there's a lot of people angry. The candidate in Pensacola, the Democratic candidate in Pensacola, won Escambia County, won Pensacola. That has not happened in generations.
No, one is one. No. Oh, the Democratic candidate. I'm sorry. Yes, I thought I misheard you. Yes, because
The rest of the
yes,
districts,
the candidate was former CFO Jimmy Petronas. He's from Panama City, and he did not win the other county in that district.
was blue.
Yeah,
I don't care who you are. If
it's essentially Alabama. Yeah.
Yes, there is something wrong with your agenda. If I don't care whether he's from Panama City or Timbuktu, your Republican nominee in a special election should blow the doors off of that. And he won by 16 points.
Yeah.
That tells you that the military folks in that area were unhappy with the way things were already going by that point, and the message that they are sending to our veterans, especially on the toxic exposure law that we have under the PACT Act, and that the fact that the Republicans were and still are cutting staffing so deeply at the VA that
Yeah.
services are going to take longer. They're cutting off contracts and access to specialists. It's you're seeing, and then we've won, except for those two. Every other special election in the country that was competitive has been won by Democrats.
And we'll be right back with Debbie Wasserman Schultz. You know what time it is. It's your moment of Zen, divas. You know, it's time for the news in haikus. The news in haikus. Around here, we say, signy sigh, but the gov says, veto time, baby. That's the news in haikus. The news in haikus. Don't forget, we'd love to hear your haiku. You can slide them into my DMs, or you can send them to podcasts, that's podcasts with an S, at e.newsserviceflorida.com. Wherever you're listening, please don't forget to subscribe and give us a rating if you like what we're doing. And we are back with DWS, or Debbie Wasserman Schultz. DWS for those of us who know her, and those of us who don't. I'm glad that you shifted to the midterms, because I wanted to talk to you about the midterms. And I guess the question is, like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but do you think that what the Republicans are doing, the agenda, the break within the Republican Party, I mean, it's sort of where the extreme factions of the party have taken control of the party. I think that's a fair thing to say. I don't think that's editorializing.
In the Republican Party.
Yes. Does that help the Democrats then going into the midterms?
It sure does. I mean, in the election cycles, if you look back to 2006,
Mm-hmm.
George W. Bush had won in 2004, and you go into the 2006 midterms, and right after he wins, he says that the election gave him a mandate to privatize Social Security. And that's what he started talking about, and Republicans started talking about all over America. And Democrats swung into action and said, you never even mentioned that on the campaign trail. Seniors were up in arms, and we campaigned aggressively against the culture of corruption that existed in people he hired, and in you had Republican members of Congress who were going to prison. So between the culture of corruption and privatizing Social Security, we won that midterm, and we took the majority back in the House. Then, I mean, of course, Barack Obama wins, but then you fast forward, we lose the majority again. You fast forward to Donald Trump getting elected in 2016. 2018 rolls around, and he has spent his first 2 years talking about how he wants and attempting to repeal the Affordable Care Act and take health care away from millions of Americans. They didn't like it, but 7 years had gone by then. 20 million people who never had health care before finally had affordable health care insurance, and they failed to repeal it thanks to John McCain in the Senate.
Right.
But then we won that midterm election because people said, no, I don't want you to take my health care away. Health care is the most important thing, making sure that you can stay healthy. So we are in a similar, and there's some, first midterm after an election for
Right.
a party wins. We are in that same situation now. By the way, we won. Democrats picked up 2 seats in the 2024 election cycle in the House of Representatives. Even while Trump won, we gained seats. We cut their lead from 5 to 3. And now we have to win 3 seats to win the majority. And you're talking about the big ugly bill is incredibly unpopular across the board. I mean, independents, Republicans, Democrats, Republicans by themselves favor it, but they are the only group that favors it. And it's not overwhelming because people do not want you to take away healthcare from people. There are lots of Republicans who get the nutrition assistance from SNAP and WIC, and they have energy tax credits that are helping make sure that there's job creation. This bill and people do not want a transfer of wealth to billionaires. They want middle class tax cuts because when we give those, that helps make sure that people can make their own bottom line better. It makes life more affordable. And lastly, I'll point out that President Trump, when he was campaigning, obsessively talked about how he was going to make life more affordable. And instead, Republicans have only made life more expensive. Erratic tariff policy that's driving up costs, people losing their jobs, business owners unable to even keep. That's a lot of business owners like the restaurant industry, agriculture, construction, who, because of his horrendous irresponsible immigration policy that's deporting people who are here lawfully, not criminals, they are having trouble finding work. I heard about a restaurant in my district today that just had notice that 12 of their employees, a restaurant, 12 of their employees who were lawfully here working with a work permit, just got notice that they have to leave the country in 30 days because of lawful immigration programs like TPS and the parole program that have been revoked, and they've been notified they have to leave.
I wanted to ask you about TPS in South Florida, but before we do that, I want to finish up on going into the midterms. You just articulated very well arguments.
Majority in November of 26.
Arguments that the Democrats can make going into the midterms. Will the Democrats have the resources to campaign competitively? And let's talk about Florida because I'm a little parochial statewide. So let's talk about Florida. Do you think that you will have the resources to really go after those congressional seats? And if not, in other places?
We'll have the resources to go after every competitive congressional district that, comes onto the playing field and remains intensely competitive anywhere in the country. We have outraised the NRCC every single month and every single quarter since this election cycle started. And we will continue to do that because supporters.
That's for you. I don't know if you could hear it. I gave you a little applause and maybe you couldn't hear it.
No, I didn't hear it, but yeah. So, we are absolutely going to have the resources and we're going to have the organization on the ground. Remember, in congressional districts are run on the ground with candidates who are, generally from the district, are incumbents, well-known. And, what Republicans will try to do is nationalize these races. They're going to want to try to, tar and feather our candidates with issues that are irrelevant to what their constituents really care about. And incumbent members' job is to make sure that the person they know, that they have trusted and that they know is going to bat for them every single day, bringing home resources, prioritizing affordability, focusing on making sure that we create jobs, that we focus on tax breaks for the middle class that are longer term and not the tax breaks for billionaires that are permanent in this big ugly bill. And the middle class tax breaks are a pittance and they expire in a couple of years.
So it's the economy, stupid.
It's the economy. People still.
I'm not calling you stupid. I was channeling whoever it was.
That was Bill Clinton. Who said that was how he ran his campaign, and that's why he won. And that's why we're going to win, because we really care about affordability. We're really focused on making sure that that you don't have tariff policy that is going to artificially balloon costs. And we started to bring inflation down at the end of the Biden administration. We have to continue to work together on that, more assertively and aggressively. And there are things that we should be doing to do that. Prescription drug prices are still too high. That's a huge issue in Florida. Joe Biden was able to cap.
Don't get me started. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and my insulin medication would be about $1,600 a month if I didn't have insurance. And so
That's $35 a month, thanks to Joe Biden, who not only did that in Medicare, the Republicans wouldn't support us to do it for everyone. So Joe Biden had to bully and shame the private health insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies into lowering that cost for everyone. And I mean, that's can you imagine? I mean, $1,600 for your insulin. I mean, diabetes is not uncommon. It's not a rare disease.
Well, I have type 1 diabetes, so we are a little rarer and whatever. I'm insulin dependent, but it's expensive, and people who have type 2 also need diabetes. That's a whole nother, we could have a whole 5 podcasts on my thoughts about how patient
So
care.
we are going to make sure that this election is about affordability and who can be trusted on that topic.
What about David Jolly? He might be at the top of the ticket. I'm already anointing him as the Democratic nominee. You're welcome, David Jolly. I had lunch with him last week here in Tallahassee. But I've known him for a while too. But people are calling him Charlie Crist 2.0. Very like the transition from Republican to independent to Democrat. Also, that did not work out well for Charlie for 3 years ago. Do you expect to see some other challengers in that race? And what are your thoughts about how the top of the ticket race is going to affect some of those down ballot races in the congressional seats?
Because in Florida, all of our constitutional officers statewide are on the ballot at the same time. Certainly, the governor's race is always the most impactful and the biggest indicator. Drag or plus.
Lift, right?
It's below statewide candidates below them on the ballot.
And you served with him in Congress too.
I did, and I like David Jolly. We worked well together when he was in Congress. I've spoken with him about his decision to leave the Republican Party initially and then become a Democrat. And quite frankly, I was really and I served with Charlie Crist, and Charlie Crist is a dear friend, and I think Charlie made his decision for very genuine reasons and was elected to Congress and served several terms as a member of Congress and did a fantastic job, served on the Appropriations Committee and got a lot done. Charlie had goals that were beyond just representing his single member district, which is why he kept trying to take his role to a larger stage.
Mm-hmm.
David, in talking to him, the biggest distinction I would make between them, Charlie made the typical comments at that time that the Republican Party had left him, and
this is exactly what David told me when we were talking.
Yeah, and that's clearly how he's describing his evolution, is that it wasn't that the Republican Party left him; it's that he left the Republican Party because he evolved over time, closer to where we are as in our party, and I would put David in the center right part of our party, and he had a record. There's a difference. We don't have to compare it to Charlie, but David had a record of going against the grain as a member of Congress, even when he didn't have to. He voted against defunding Planned Parenthood when we had that raging debate during that time as a Republican member of Congress. He voted for gun safety reforms that, even though he said he was a supporter of the Second Amendment, he had a track record of reflecting the views of the people in his district and in his community. And, he was already in the centrist camp. And so, as the Republican Party has become more and more extreme, especially on guns and reproductive freedom and women's healthcare decisions, and the Republican Party has just become mean and uncaring and callous. The callous indifference that exists in the Republican Party about people's lives and the quality of their life. I mean, my God, why did you run for office? I
Well,
mean,
he's an interesting guy. He comes across, he's very mild mannered. He seems very nice, and I think I should just sort of note that he got unelected from office because Charlie defeated him. I mean, they were in the same district there, so the similarities are quite intriguing. And he does really emphasize that he has evolved on issues.
that district had changed to be far more blue
Yeah.
than it under Bill Young and when David was first elected in that seat.
Right. Well, let's talk about. So, do you think he's going to be the nominee, or who else do you see might be getting into that race? You got Jason Pizzo left the Democratic Party, down from your neck of the woods. You got Hillary Cassell, also in your backyard, left the Democratic Party, state House member. So who do you think we might? I guess Jason's running as an independent. John Morgan, I don't know what he's doing. If that's a
Put Hillary Cassell firmly in the I care only about myself camp, and I want to be where the power is, and the hypocrisy, the depth of her hypocrisy is astonishing.
Really?
Oh my God! I mean, she ran unopposed as a Democrat. I campaigned with her side by side for Democratic candidates on election day.
Wow.
I mean, she is a hypocrite of the first order. She is of, by, and for herself, and that is not what public service is supposed to be about. I mean, she put up a tweet the other day that praised Donald Trump and the big beautiful bill. I'll call it what they call it. She fully embraced massive healthcare cuts that will hugely damage her constituents, and she's embracing a party that has a spokesperson for the Department of Defense that is an anti-Semite, has publicly expressed anti-Semitic views, and still has a job.
Is she going to get reelected? Do you think she'll get reelected?
There's an excellent candidate, Tom Delmay, who's in the race, and I think that he will likely win that seat. This is not going to be an election cycle in Broward County in which folks are going to embrace a MAGA extremist.
And back to the governor's race, I interrupted you by mentioning by triggering you with Hillary. Do you think that David will become the nominee, and do you expect to see who else do you think we might see enter the race?
June of the off year, I don't know who else is going to get in. Way too early.
Okay. Let's move on. I want to move on to something. We mentioned Parkland. That was, is Parkland's not in your district, or it is in your district? Not, but it's close to your district.
Just up the road.
Right. We have two state legislators from Minnesota that were shot and killed, and their spouses. One was shot and killed, and her spouse was shot and killed. The other and his wife were shot and survived. You've been doing this for a hot minute. There's so much heated rhetoric online. People are, you mentioned people being, mean, and it's just, we're in a new era now where the threats and the languaging is just so visceral. It's so scary. It gives me chills just to read what people are saying sometimes. What are your thoughts on where we are about the political? I don't have to ask you. You've already said that question. You've answered that question. But how concerned are you as you're friends with Gabby Giffords, right? So are you taking extra protections? We had January 6th, So I guess I don't need to tell you what's happened, and I'm sure you don't want to give away like what you're doing, but in general terms, can you tell me how you're coping with that?
Um, I have been the victim of death threats over many years, and the security environment that exists now. I think in part because of the heated, intense rhetoric that has really skyrocketed to epic proportions, where people aren't keeping, they're not governing themselves accordingly when it comes to choosing their words, and they're not thinking about what they might say and how what they say how it might incite someone who is fragile and unhinged. I mean, the murder of Sarah and Yaron in the Israeli
Oh
embassy
yeah,
employees left a
yeah,
uh, Jewish committee event, was the most devastating, brutal, sadistic killing that I could possibly think of, and
yeah.
it was because this person was an anti-Israel, anti-Semite, and was willing to kill people because they were Jewish.
When
I
they're
mean,
getting radicalized online, I mean, that's
sure,
what's.
these are people here in America, and I mean, you probably don't remember that there was 16 bomb packages sent around the country by a deranged lunatic in my district with my name and return address on them to officials, and
I didn't
the one,
remember.
yes, and Eric Holder was one of those. The address was wrong. It was returned. The package was returned to sender, came back to my district office, and
Oh,
had to be detonated in a stairwell by the sheriff's office
oh
because it.
my God.
Yeah, the detail that I had during that time and the aftermath of that, and just continued really horrendous threats. People can feel very strongly, and I certainly feel strongly about my beliefs on behalf of the fighting that I do in support of my constituents. But we really have to be thoughtful and careful. And I want to, beyond choosing the words carefully so you don't incite people who are dangerous, the rampant anti-Semitism that
Yeah,
exists, the Jew hatred.
I want to talk about that.
I mean, the Jewish community is being targeted. It is the old anti-Semitism is the oldest ism. It is the canary in the coal mine, and really, people have to treat anti-Semitism and hate of Jews like we should treat any hate against any group,
And yet
because
that
hate.
comes at this, it sort of coincides with this, this embrace verbally and of Israel. And so it's been sort of perplexing to me to see this rise in anti-Semitism at the same time you see these Israel flags and everybody. Do you know what I mean? Like are they disconnected?
Anti-Semitism in this country has been on the dramatic rise prior to October 7th, prior to the Israeli Palestinian conflict intensifying, um, and October 7th sent it into the stratosphere. But there's run of the mill anti-Semitism and Jew hatred, and then there's the question of anti-Zionism being anti-Semitism.
Okay.
So anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism. When you target an individual, when you um, spew hatred that is focused on that you believe that Israel that does not have the right to exist as a Jewish state, when there are dozens upon dozens of Muslim states and other countries that have Christianity as a component of their governance, that is anti-Semitism, because we have one country that is a Jewish nation, a Jewish homeland for the Jewish people, and if your hatred of Israel is targeted at the notion that you don't believe that the Jewish people have the right to a homeland, that's anti-Semitism. Now, if you don't like what the government of Israel is doing, that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
And you can certainly oppose the government's actions. But what's happened, and that is an added danger, is the level of anti-Semitism that is beyond just that exists because there are people that believe that Jews don't have the right to a homeland, has caused attacks. The online anti-Semitism that exists has been so explosive, and the takedown policies of social media companies have really gone in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
More hateful content up.
It's unmitigated. It's just, it's
out of the computer screen, Dara, and it has caused real world violence. I have constituents who've been assaulted before walking to synagogue wearing, garb and, and items that make them known as obviously Jewish.
Right.
Jews are afraid to walk around being publicly identifiable as Jews. The nonprofit, and you know what else is a problem? A huge problem is Donald Trump has withheld federal nonprofit security grant funding that has already been allocated to Jewish and other institutions that face danger as a result of these attacks, and he's withholding it. And it's $800 million that is still owed and has not been released, even though Congress has passed it and it's law. And then on top of that, they're not increasing the funding in the president's budget to make sure that the vulnerabilities are able to be more addressed.
I know I'm getting rushed here, and so we have to finish up. I do want to add that in Florida, the legislature, the Republican-led legislature, and Governor DeSantis have been really good over the past couple of years of making sure that Jewish day schools get additional security. So we do have some funding for that. She's rolling her eyes at me, but that's
really helpful. But Ron DeSantis has certainly not been someone who I would count on if I needed to make sure that there was that if it wasn't in his long-term political interests to be a supporter of the Jewish community, then I don't think that I would. I'm certain I wouldn't trust him.
Let me ask you a few last questions, and I promise we'll wrap up quickly. Have you read Jake Tapper's book, and what do you think about it, and what can you spill about Joe Biden?
I have not read Jake Tapper's book, and the only thing I can spill about Joe Biden is that I was proud to serve in Congress under his leadership, and he was the most successful president legislatively in modern times, creating infrastructure, the largest infrastructure bill that ever became law, hundreds of thousands of jobs created, bringing chip manufacturing home thanks to the Chips and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, which made sure that we could bring prescription drug costs down for our seniors, and energy tax credits that ensures that we can balance, climate resiliency and ensuring that we created jobs with, electric vehicles that Republicans are trying to take away in the big ugly bill, by the way. The most significant, gun safety reform legislation passed in 30 years. This was a president that was an absolute success, and I was proud to support him.
Thank you for that. Let's do a little something fun before we say goodbye. What's something about you that most people don't know that you can share with our divas?
I taught myself to cook when I was just after I finished surviving breast cancer, because I could boil water and scramble eggs and nothing else.
Really?
Yeah. And I knew that I needed to do something to help make sure that I put more healthy things into my body. So I shifted to being focused on clean eating, but I had to make sure that I could cook.
Oh, wow.
So I began cooking, self-taught. And to motivate myself, I launched an Instagram account called Clean Cooking Congresswoman.
Yeah, you told us that. You did tell us that last time, and I need to follow that again. And so what's your signature dish?
Anything with shrimp in it is and also quinoa.
Quinoa. I love quinoa.
it's such a great substitute for rice, and it's a protein. It's not. It can be flavored with so many different things. It has a very neutral taste when you don't flavor it, but it is a healthy alternative and acts like a starch, but doesn't have the unhealthy impact of starch.
Well, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, U.S. Representative, my old pal, thank you so much for joining us again today. And we're going to let you go because I know you're rushing off to something else. But thanks, and we'll talk to you again soon, I hope.
Okay, thanks so much. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida, hosted by News Service senior writer Dara Cam and produced by me, Mike Exline. Music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC.